When we look at the research on pregnancy outcomes or even children, there are cases where concerns are raised, and that's typically when kids or say pregnant mothers are, under eating, they're not supplementing appropriately, they're eating overly restrictive diets, not gaining enough weight, particularly through pregnancy, which obviously is an issue of not eating enough. But in research where they are consuming enough calories, they're getting adequate nutrition. If we look at, say, the Vichy studies for children out of Germany, the vegan children were eating the same amount of calories as the omnivorous kids. They were supplementing appropriately. They actually had better micronutrient intake and status than the omnivores on average. They grow just fine and they develop just fine.
If we talk about specific phases of life, you recently did a video for Plant-Based News about CarnivoreMD now getting debunked by everyone. You debunked the nutrients he was saying are missing or low in the plant-based diet. A lot of focused on athletic performance, but in the literature, it's all very theoretical. There's this concept of conditionally essential amino acids. They say that in times of illness or stress, people need these amino acids. Does this turn out in reality?
Yeah, so what we ultimately need to look at are outcomes. So, if you're talking about pregnancy or any other stage of life, do vegans or vegetarians have worse outcomes? And if they don't, then I don't see a reason to speculate about these conditionally essential, say, amino acids or nutrients. And so now when we look at the research on pregnancy outcomes or even children, there are cases where concerns are raised, and that's typically when kids or the say pregnant mothers are under eating, they're not supplementing appropriately, they're eating overly restrictive diets, not gaining enough weight, particularly through pregnancy, which obviously is an issue of not eating enough. In those cases, there might be some concerns, absolutely, around like stunted growth or development. But in research where they are consuming enough calories, they're getting adequate nutrition. If we look at, say, the Vichy studies for children out of Germany, the vegan children were eating the same amount of calories as the omnivorous kids. They were supplementing appropriately. They actually had better micronutrient intake and status than the omnivores on average. And they grow just fine and they develop just fine. So I just don't see, if we're talking about these conditionally essential, amino acids, it's just so much speculation at this point when it comes to vegan diets. And look, if it was a concern, you could supplement, right? That's the other thing. So I just don't see a big reason to hyper focus on them unless we have good evidence for it.
Would you recommend any of your clients to supplement with taurine or choline during periods of illness?
Yeah, so for taurine, I just haven't seen good evidence of that. For choline, potentially through pregnancy, I could see that being a time to supplement. I would say the evidence isn't super clear. It is a bit mixed, but one of the better trials did see improvements in child cognitive outcomes with supplementation, although their diet might have been super low in choline, and there are choline-rich plant foods like soy, for example. So as a safety net, I would say supplementing during pregnancy isn't a terrible idea. A lot of prenatals nowadays will actually contain choline as well. But for something like taurine, I just haven't seen strong enough evidence to at least support any strong recommendations around it.
A lot of this speculation, I think, came from one study where vegans had reduced wound healing following surgery. But then if you read the study, they had extremely low B12 and iron status.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny. Like, I don't see how someone jumps to taurine on that when you have this elderly population with low B12 status and possibly low iron status, and they have delayed wound healing or greater scar tissue, and you just point to taurine. It just seems like a ridiculous kind of leap to take, at least as far as your first consideration. So yeah, I would totally agree with you there.
Choline doesn't have an RDA.
No, adequate intake, AI.
Yeah. If I understand correctly how they did the study, they picked a very low value and a very high value. And then the very high value corrected the deficiency, which was around 550 milligrams. And then they said that's the value.
Yeah, so they had people in the low choline group, roughly around 50 milligrams or so a day. And then in the high choline group, they supplemented 500 milligrams. And they found that those in the high group avoided choline deficiency symptoms, but those in the low choline group developed some choline deficiency symptoms. And so then they conclude that, okay, well, we should be aiming for that higher target. But obviously the true need is going to be somewhere in the middle. It's not necessarily going to be at that high target, but that's just how the recommendations were developed. But if we look at, say, NHANES data, so this is a nationally representative sample from the US, and we look at their choline intake, it's well below the recommendations amongst children, women, and men. And so, and since deficiency is super rare, at least overt deficiency, not that we have great testing for that sort of thing, but once other things are ruled out and you have a proper dietary evaluation, you might be able to point to that. Since overt deficiency is super rare and people are consuming well below the recommendations, chances are the true needs are actually much lower than the adequate intake. And that's why we don't have an RDA, because we don't have a lot of solid evidence for it at this point. It's just that we know that 500 plus is going to be adequate. That's really it.
Choline is very important for the liver.
And possibly neurological health.
There's lots of speculation. For example, Andew Huberman, in one of his podcasts, he recommended taking 1,000 milligrams per day. I'm not sure if you've seen this, but...
I haven't seen that one, no.
In general, most people should probably strive to get somewhere between 500 milligrams and a gram of choline per day, so 1,000 milligrams. And some people rely on supplementation in order to hit those levels. Some people will supplement with 50 to 100 milligrams or whatever amount is necessary to get them up to that 1 gram or even a 2 gram dose per day.
I haven't seen any evidence to support a dose of 1,000 milligrams. I'd like to know actually what was cited for that, because that seems very, very high.
He also really promotes eggs in that podcast, and he says eggs are a source of choline, but then you also have so many other plant-based sources.
You have soy, chickpeas, lentils, split peas, things like quinoa can provide a little bit. You've got broccoli, Brussels sprouts, like it all adds up. You can have some plant-based sources of choline and get a decent amount out of it.
There was actually a bit of a Twitter thread, Kevin Klatt. He did the study looking at choline DHA in pregnant women, and he said the recommendations that Huberman made of 1,000 milligrams is not evidence-based.
Yeah, okay, that would make sense, because that's, like I said, that sounds very high.
Have you learned about one-carbon metabolism? Because there's also some people who have this genetic polymorphism,
MTHFR?
THFR is 77.
I'm not sure about the specific one. More so, I've looked at like MTHFR and like B12 metabolism and that, and I honestly haven't seen large concerns there, especially given how consistently the supplements seem to work regardless. But yeah, I haven't seen that specific one that you're talking about.
It's the MTHFR C677T variant. People with this variant, they have high levels of homocysteine. I spoke with Nick Heber, and he takes choline specifically because he has this. I quizzed him on it, and at the end he said, I don't know why I'm taking it. So.
No, I mean, yeah, maybe I'll chat with him about that, because I am not familiar with that specific topic.
Now that you're kind of mentioning this, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. It's just an intuition. It's not health advice. It's not anything that anybody else should do. I'm just an idiot.
What about just in terms of elevated homocysteine? Is that a bad thing?
Possibly. I know there's a bit of evidence around like elevated homocysteine and say stroke risk. I mean, that was one of the speculations around the vegetarian diets and stroke risk as well, was that, a large portion of people in that population, as I mentioned, were not supplementing. And if they weren't supplementing B12, maybe their homocysteine's elevated and that's contributing. Like that's certainly a fair speculation as well. And so it is something that we probably want to keep under control if we can. And one of the best ways, at least for people without that polymorphism, again, not something I've really looked into, supplementing B12 and getting adequate folate intake seems to do the trick.
Would you say homocysteine is more of a marker or a causal risk factor?
I would say I'm not strongly, or I wouldn't strongly say that it is necessarily causal at this point. I'd have to look more into the data on that.
And so going back to the specific phases of life, with regards to pregnancy, surprise, CarnivoreMD is back. He recently released a new video with a claim saying that vegan mothers have a placenta of a smoker.
Looking at the placentas of vegan or vegetarian mothers, the lack of nourishment is clear.
This one was from a mom that was primarily vegetarian. This is called calcification. It's hard. There's a sand-like, rock-like consistency throughout the entire placenta. And this was animal-based. So she had lots of red meat, pasteurized eggs, raw milk. The difference between the two, I mean, it's just obvious.
for both men and women, including meat and organs in your diet, is essential for optimal fertility and overall health. To learn more about this, check out the documentary that I just created with Heart and Soil Supplements.
CarnivoreMD, he associates with a lot of people who have not been honest in the past. I've seen him not make honest statements on Instagram. For example, he's previously claimed that everyone has celiac disease when it's only 1% of the population. And then he's also associated with John Baker, who's recently made a fake video. I can't remember exactly what it was.
I think Lifting Vegan Logic did a response to it or something on Twitter or on YouTube.
We're going to be discussing some lies that Sean Baker has been caught in spreading. Sean Baker has made this post on Twitter and Instagram. On Twitter, it says, fun fact, numerous studies have now shown consistent relationships between plant-based diets and significantly increased fracture rates. Followed by these two images, one of non-vegan bones and vegan bones. And his post on Instagram is pretty much the same. So where to begin? First of all, these images are not from any of the studies Sean cites, nor is the second image of vegan bones. If you reverse image search them, you will find that they are from a NASA page on bone mineral loss when in a reduced gravity environment. So it appears that Sean is trying to mislead his audience with pictures of two sets of bones, claiming that the set of bones with bone mineral loss are vegan bones. I want you to think for a second how people's minds tend to work on social media today. I mean, just look at Sean's Instagram version of this post. From the time I'm recording this video, it has over 20,000 likes. So Sean's fan base, and just people in general who hold extremely silly beliefs in regard to vegan nutrition, are going to view these pictures deceivingly posted by Sean and think, wow, those are vegan bones, and just move on with their day. The fact is that most people do not go out of their way to fact check things or reverse image search pictures they find online to confirm the images are indeed what they are being reported to be. Not to mention that people all over social media are motivated to find content which confirms their biases. So now we have a bunch of people who have not fact checked this misleading post, sharing it around, convincing other people who do not fact check posts that this is a real image of vegan bones. Now, what kind of dishonest scum do you need to be to initiate this process of misleading information being spread? This is the kind of behavior that makes me much less inclined to believe Sean when he explains why exactly he was stripped of his medical license. Another example of his dishonesty is him sharing an article concerning an infant he was fed an almond milk-based diet and attributing this entire story to veganism, even though the article makes no mention of the parent being vegan or anything to do with veganism.
And same again with Liver King. He knew him before he was mainstream.
Leaked emails, blood test results, and a full steroid cycle breakdown. That's what we're going to be getting into in this video, and it is shocking to say the least. Before we do, though, it only feels fitting to go back to the beginning because this very much feels like a story that has come full circle for us on this channel and do it the justice it deserves by fleshing it out from inception.
We were eating testicle and liver together and nobody knew, right? And I just feel pretty kind of, I feel like a cool kid knowing you before you exploded. I thought it would also be really cool to tell people a little bit of the Heart and Soil story on this podcast, because that kind of wraps into the way you and I have known each other. Like I said, we met at Paleo FX 4 years ago. And I'll never forget the dinner that we had there in addition to the business card. I mean, what a friendship we've had. I'll let you tell the story, but I think it's important for people to understand, you know, the Heart and Soil brotherhood that we have and where it came from.
I remember this like yesterday. I remember you calling and I remember taking the phone call and I remember the way you said it. You told me that you're going to start a company. You're going to lift a company that you're going to start a company that's a supplement company. And I'm like, oh, okay, tell me more. And you're like, well, we might be competitors. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting. And I know you didn't know what I was thinking, but I'm thinking this might be the biggest opportunity of my life, right? So I'm thinking we're never going to be competitors. Like we're going to be allies. We're going to go shoulder to shoulder.
It seems like he'll push anything to sell. He'll basically sell any sort of argument to try and sell his supplements. So who's to say they just didn't switch the two placentas? Again, it's an anecdote.
Well, it's worse than that because, I mean, yeah, they could have switched the vegetarian omnivore. They could both be omnivores. They could both be vegetarians. Maybe the vegetarian did smoke. You know, he's talking about the placenta of a smoker. Maybe they were. We have none of it's literally two samples. It's a video of a lady saying that there's these two placentas and one is a vegetarian, one's not, and you see the vegetarian one is in worse shape than the omnivorous one or carnivorous or whatever they were eating. there's no way to validate that, and there's no evidence to back it up. And that's one thing I pointed out in the recent video I did with Plant-Based News too, is just he almost never cites anything. He just makes a bunch of claims, and people just take his word for it. And when you actually dive into, the nutrient claims or whatever he's making, I mean, they just don't stand up to the evidence.
In general, as you said, what we should look at is the key health outcomes. Plant-based diets, they seem to have a lot of beneficial effects in terms of pregnancy. I've read also in terms of gestational diabetes. Have you looked into this?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say there's a lot of data on like vegans and vegetarians and gestational diabetes. I think the data is maybe a little bit mixed as to whether or not there's benefit, but with more plant-based diets generally, like plant-based diet indices, there does seem to be a bit of a benefit there as far as gestational diabetes, and that probably largely comes down to gestational weight gain too.
Another key health outcome is depression. I know you've done a few reels in the past on risk of depression. What's your take on this as a short summary?
Yeah, so these came largely out of a systematic review that was published, I think, in 2020. And this review ultimately concluded that meat-free diets are associated with higher risk of depression, and they might have mentioned anxiety as well. I can't recall. And this review was very odd. So if you go through, the studies and how they ranked them, there was one randomized controlled trial and I think 16 or 17 mostly cross-sectional studies, which is like the lowest level of observational research, where you're just looking at a snapshot in time. Like I mentioned before, it's important to know what came first. Did the vegetarian diet come first, or did the mental health concerns come first? And in these studies, it's really hard to know which one came first. So they had one randomized controlled trial, which they rated as low quality, and they didn't really give a good explanation for it. And then they ignored two other randomized controlled trials on plant-based dietary interventions without even mentioning them. So it wasn't like they were excluded because they didn't meet some inclusion-exclusion criteria. It's like they didn't even mention them, and I'm not sure why. And then, they ranked a lot of these, other cross-sectional studies, either high, medium, there's a couple in the low category as well. And so what I did was I actually dove into what they rated as high. There was only two. And when you do that, you actually find that they explicitly noted that the vegetarian diet on average comes after mental health concerns. So people are struggling with depression or anxiety, and then they adopted a vegetarian diet. So how on earth could the vegetarian diet cause the mental health concerns? Right? More realistically, it could be that people are struggling with mental health and maybe they want to adopt a healthier dietary pattern to see if it helps. Maybe. Or maybe there's a common factor that leads to mental health concerns and predisposes one to choosing a more vegetarian diet. That's possible too. I mean, we know that vegetarians or vegans generally are more aware of a lot of the suffering in the world, and maybe that's contributing. Perhaps people who are super health or perhaps even body image focused are more predisposed to suffering from mental health concerns as well, and maybe that's why they're choosing a plant-based diet. We don't have these answers based on that data. And so, I'm thinking, well, why on earth, are they, one, ignoring the explanations that are given in their own, studies that they rate as high quality, and why are they ignoring, a couple of the trials that we have without really any good reason, while downplaying the one trial that they did include? And actually, I think it might be related to bias. Now, I'm not one to normally point to industry funding and that sort of thing, but it was, funded by the beef industry and that as well. And it does make me wonder if maybe some of the authors had some biases there too, because it didn't really make sense. And when something seems so odd like that, it does make me, question it a little bit. But I would never dismiss research on the basis of it is, funded or whatever by industry. I mean, that is down the road, the cherry on top, essentially, in the explanation. Now, if we look at data that has been published since, there was a meta-analysis published a little over a year ago that separated out semi-vegetarians or flexitarians, vegetarians, and then the vegans. And there were no significant associations between vegan or vegetarian diets and the depression, but there was a significant association between semi-vegetarian or flexitarian diets and depression. So it might be the case that in those studies looking at, vegetarian diets, it's actually these more flexitarians that are driving the association. And that leads me to possibly believe that there is, some common factor that is driving individuals to adopt, maybe a more plant-based diet, whether it's for body image or health or whatever, while also predisposing them to developing, depressive symptoms or something like that. But we just need much higher quality data in this field, in the area of diet and mental health. And I know Megan Lee, who is a PhD down in Australia, she's starting to publish some stuff, and they're working on a prospective cohort right now to help tease this out. So looking forward to that.
Next question is to do with fiber. Also on social media, we hear about people saying you can get used to having more fiber. If someone has digestive problems from fiber, extreme bloating, for example, have you seen any studies where this can subside through sticking to a high fiber diet, or would you recommend them to go to a more low fiber vegan diet?
Yeah, so there is research suggesting that those gastrointestinal symptoms that can come up, especially when you adopt a more fiber-rich, especially legume-rich diet, they tend to subside within a few months in most people. So that's one thing, is most people it will subside. The other thing, though, that we want to consider is that you don't want to go 0 to 100 super quick. It is probably better and going to be more comfortable to slowly increase fiber intake. How slowly and how much can each individual incorporate at a time is going to vary person to person. So there might be a little bit of trial and error there too. But yeah, I mean, fiber as far as cardiovascular risk, diabetes risk, colorectal cancer risk, I mean, it's super beneficial. It's something that we want to be having a fair amount of, but generally want to slowly ramp it up to get there rather than going all in right away. And there are ways to mitigate some of the symptoms from things like legumes as well by soaking them overnight prior to cooking, rinsing well, and that as well.
With regards to the legume-rich diet you mentioned, was that a study? Was it an RCT?
I can't recall. I haven't looked at that one in a while. I'll have to double check that and send it over to you.
Perfect. That would be great, because I'm still trying to find a study where they just look at digestive systems specifically in terms of bloating.
No, I was just going to say it is an area where I would like to see more research as well. We actually don't have a ton on mitigating these symptoms when adopting high fiber diets, at least going, like I said, 0 to 100. But we have a little bit, and what we do have suggests that it does subside. And yeah, I'll send that over to you.
Simon Hill, he's made a few posts where he's saying the gut microbiome is like a gym. You need to train the microbes, get them adapted. But I still don't know exactly what gut dysbiosis means exactly in terms of the microbial communities. And is it better for someone who's got bad symptoms just to say, you know what, I'm going to go on a low fiber diet?
So definitely with certain types of symptoms, that can help, the low fiber diet. It's just not something I would want to do long term. For symptom management, yeah, absolutely. But if we're talking about, again, chronic disease risk down the road, we want to be having that fiber. And so we want to see what ways we can, increase that over time and hopefully get to a more healthy range.
I came across a paper recently with regards to FODMAPs, where looking at when they get rid of these particularly troublesome fermentable carbs and then reintroduce them, and there seemed to be some beneficial outcomes there, that people then could reintroduce selected FODMAPs and without any symptoms. So
yeah, absolutely. FODMAPs, for people listening, are fermentable oligo di and monosaccharides and polyols. That's it. I had to think about it for a second. They're these compounds that our gut microbes can essentially chew up and lead to gas production, and then we get bloated and that sort of thing. And some people really react to them, and they're found in large amounts in wheat products, in onion and garlic and certain fruits. And yeah, there is research on low FODMAP diets and improving some of those gut symptoms. But again, it's not something we want to do long term. It's a very restrictive diet. It will, potentially increase risk of inadequate nutrition, especially if you're eating plant-based, because it really limits your plant-based options. So it's one of those things that's, a temporary possible fix under medical or dietetic, supervision. And then you can, slowly reintroduce and see what you react to and maybe what you're able to reincorporate.
We can't talk about vegan diets without talking about the importance of B12. How long can someone survive without B12?
Yeah, so as far as survival, I don't know that I've seen a hard number, but as far as symptoms, I mean, you can go a few years without having symptoms of deficiency. And, the problem with B12 deficiency is long term, not only can it lead to anemia and fatigue, being one of the big symptoms, it can actually lead to neurological symptoms, dementia-like symptoms, where you're having memory loss, or you can have symptoms of like tingling and numbness. And it's a scary thing to run into B12 deficiency. And so it's one of the reasons that, given that we aren't getting a lot of B12 from plant foods unless they're fortified, and even then it's something that you'd probably have to think about a bit and having consistently. A supplement, easiest way to go for basically anybody. You could even do a high dose once a week and get enough that way, and that's what I personally do. I like just having every Sunday I have my high dose B12 and I'm good to go. So yeah, I recommend every vegan take it just to be on the safe side.
These dementia-like symptoms, are they permanent?
So for some of the neurological symptoms, they can be permanent. For the dementia symptoms, I think they're largely reversible. I'd have to double check that. But unlike obviously with Alzheimer's, it's not going to be reversible. But still, you don't want to end up there, right? You don't want to go down that road.
A few months ago, my course mate told me that people with a particular blood type should be eating meat.
The blood type O does very well with and needs animal protein, especially red meat, whereas the blood type A generally does better with easier to digest proteins like fish and carbohydrates from plants. Paleo diet would be a great option for blood type O in my opinion. Blood type A's tend to do very well with more Mediterranean diets or even the pegan diet, which means vegan plus fish, pegan. Carnivore would probably resonate most with blood type O, whereas blood type A will generally not feel too good on all the red meats. Blood type B falls somewhere in between. What holds true for all blood types, though, is that we should avoid all pro-inflammatory foods that I call the core four. If you want to learn how to think in nutrients for optimal health, then follow me.
And today in your newsletter, I saw that you had an article on this. What have you found with regards to blood type?
Yeah, so the blood type diet was popularized by Pierre D'Adamo. I think that's how you pronounce his name. Who wrote the Eat Right for Your Type in, I think, 1994, 96, somewhere in there. And basically it suggests that if you're a certain blood type, so if you're type O, you do better on a more kind of animal-based diet. If you're type A, you do better on a more plant-based diet. And then B and AB are kind of in between, and there's different foods that are okay and not okay in those. And it's largely based on, studies where they'll, in a petri dish, they'll drip blood onto different types of proteins from foods, and you'll see the proteins aggregate or clump up, and it kind of translates that into saying that, well, if you eat that food, then this is going to happen in your blood, which, for starters, we break down proteins in our digestive tract. You don't absorb them whole, so that's ridiculous. And this sort of type of evidence, this very mechanistic type of evidence, almost never translates to outcomes in humans. So we have to look at human health outcomes. And fortunately, since D'Adamo didn't do any of this research himself, we've had people actually go through and track people's diets with varying blood types, and multiple analyses have actually found that regardless of blood type, people tend to do better on the type A diet, which is the more plant-based diet, funny enough. It's not strictly plant-based by any means, but just generally eating more plant-based seems to be good regardless. So yeah, it's been debunked a long time ago and repeatedly since. So I wouldn't pay any attention to it.
Perfect. A few fun questions to wrap things up. What is your favorite book?
Harry Potter. One of them, probably. I don't know which one I picked, but one of them.
Nice. You're very active on social media whilst working hard. Do you have any tips for people looking to improve their time management?
I feel like I'm the wrong person to ask. I always commit to too much, and then I'm like, oh no, I have so much to do this week. I don't know. It's just about like prioritizing stuff. Like I'm in a long distance relationship. So when my partner's at school, I really, fill my schedule with a lot of this stuff, and then when she's home, I don't book things, and I spend more time with her. And so I think it's just about figuring out like where it fits in your schedule, using a calendar. I can't tell you how long I didn't even really use my phone calendar that much. Now I live by it, and it just keeps me organized. So I don't know that I'm the best person to ask that to, because I feel like I'm still figuring it out a little bit, but it's just about prioritizing depending on the time and how much time I have.
Are there people who work better at night? Are there such thing as genetic early birds or genetic night owls? Have you looked into this as well?
I haven't, but you know who would be really good for that? Alan Flanagan, because he's done a lot of research into circadian rhythms and like nutrition and circadian rhythms, but I feel like he might know more about that topic as well.
I read a tiny bit into it, and some people said there is some sort of genetic component, but you wouldn't want to be staying up past midnight, even if you're a night owl.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. I would bet there probably is at least a bit of a genetic component, but I just don't know that I'm well read on that topic to answer it.
We've talked a lot about health. Is ethics something important for you as well as a vegan, or are you more for the health side of things?
Oh, no. So from a health perspective, I don't think you need to be vegan to be healthy. I think the vegan diet can be compatible with very good health and similarly healthy to other healthy dietary patterns. I don't think a Mediterranean diet is necessarily healthier than or worse than my own diet or a DASH diet or whatever. It is the ethics that drives me to be 100% plant-based and to remain 100% plant-based.
Amazing. And so last question then, maybe you've not really thought about this, maybe you have, maybe this question means nothing to you. What would you say is the meaning of life?
Oh man, you're hitting me with that one right off. But I should have listened to all your episodes to figure out how people answer it. I don't know, just to enjoy it. I don't know that I have a really profound answer for that or something I've really thought about, but I just try to enjoy it. We only have one.
Are you spiritual? Do you believe that there is something after?
Not really.
People can follow you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok.
Yeah. I mean, I just post my Instagrams to TikTok too, but yeah.
How do you post everywhere at once?
Oh no, I do it manually. I feel like I'm really behind the eight ball on that. I know people have like programs that automatically post and stuff. I don't do any of that.
You also have a newsletter which has got many good articles. There was a pack on cholesterol as well on your website.
Yeah, I just did for a long time I'd use other handouts I found online for patients. So like the portfolio diet handout from University of Toronto, it's pretty good, but I always thought it's missing some stuff, and I was like, how can I add things to make it better? So I just made my own, and then I made it downloadable as well, so people can download that at drmatthewnagra.com/resources, and it's free, so you can download that there.
Nice. And then lastly, we can visit your website to see all your past podcasts. Mm-hmm. I think you also have a YouTube channel where you also have a few interviews.
Yeah, so I have my YouTube channel. Again, just search my name, it should come up. Again, at least for the shorter videos, I just post my Instagram stuff over there. But once in a while, I have a longer video, whether it's a debate or an interview or something like that too.
I'll also link your debate on seed oils. It's a 3 hour.
4 hours. It's almost 4 hours. It was like 3:45 or something.
That's a good one to watch. Thanks a lot for joining. You've really debunked a few myths along the way today.
I hope so.
Thanks a lot for tuning in. You can support Foolproof Mastery in a number of ways. First of all, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and leave a review on Apple Podcasts with an honest opinion of what you think. Leave plenty of comments on YouTube and share with your friends, family and colleagues if you feel that you have learned something new in order to keep on getting the knowledge out to as many people as possible. Finally, keep on living every day to the maximum and see you next time for another episode. Ciao.